Today I have only one goal, and that is completely concentrating onto making music, absolutely no business stuff.
Why did we waste our only sign? Was it ever worth my mind? Did I ever cross a line? No, you won't even say. So lie again to faith and love. Did you ever give enough? Was it all just broken trust? What can I even say?
Okay, first task, all of the business stuff. Valet was taking care of it. Yeah. I need to make music today. My next release needs to be finished this week, actually. Do I have like the remix contest and doing the promotion for the I'm Joffrey track? Okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Good luck. I'm so excited to finally work on the next release. It's really about time. As you might remember, I have 4 tracks laying around, 2 with Aaron, 2 with Gavin. Couldn't really decide which one to do first. But yesterday evening I made a plan, and it's now safe 100%. This will be the order of the tracks. First Final Warning in 8 weeks, then We Runnin', then the Not Scared track that is already finished like for half a year or something like that. I'm still having problems with the singer and songwriter. They're now actually all solved, which is really good. Track will also come, then the Stay Forever track, and probably at the beginning of next year the Open Your Eyes track. So I've written all of the tracks for this entire year. I will probably do in between a couple of new instrumentals to get singer and songwriters for the next year, and also do a couple of other sessions. If you're interested how the track that I will work on today was made, I will link it somewhere up there. It's the session with Aaron where we did the Final Warning track, and yeah, I will try and finish it this week. It's actually already pretty far. It's a little bit future-based influenced. Every time I do a session, it's all about making 1 track per day, just trying to get all of the musical stuff together and write a track that works, where the lyrics are good, the melodies are good. And then I usually wait a little bit. I listen to the track for quite some time to really decide if it's good enough and worth it to actually finish it, because producing the track takes the longest time. Getting all of the EQing right, the mixing, the compression, doing the sound design and the arrangement on the track takes a couple of days, maybe even weeks or months. This track right now is already... I don't actually want to know how much time I spent on it. I wish there was like a command where you can view how much time you spend on a Logic project. I know that some computer games have it where you enter like / and then play it, and it shows you the time you played. That's usually a point that opens your eyes, where you realize you just spent way too much time with that kind of stuff. But yeah, first up, really going through all of the individual tracks and trying to EQ the tracks a little further. Most of them just have a low cut on top of them, which is like a standard. I have a low cut on almost every single element, except maybe for the kick and the bass, but sometimes even they get a low cut. And it really depends. For vocals, maybe up to 200 Hertz, for a main synth, maybe 150 for the bass. Maybe just cutting away to 30, 40 or 50 to have more room for the kick. And on the kick, maybe just cutting below 20 or 30, or sometimes not at all. So just as an example, let me open up the EQs here on this track. This right here is the EQ on the top kick. It's cut at 370 Hertz. Then the EQ on the bottom kick is quite the opposite. You have more of the low end. I will later on listen closer to it and maybe even add a tiny bit of low cut also here on this one. Next up are here the snares. And I just cutted them around 100 Hertz. You could even go into the sound and start to cut like the fundamental frequency. But be careful with that. It might happen that the sound starts to sound really thin. The low cuts are actually just there to get rid of low frequency noises, rumble. Some software synthes output a ton of sub without any reason for it. And just cutting it away will clean up your mix a whole lot. Just cut into the sounds and listen to it solo. Decide where the sound starts to sound really thin and back off a little bit again. Then listen again to it with the entire other elements playing at the same time and decide again if you could even cut the sound a little bit more. Because for example, if you have a low bass and a high bass, you can definitely cut away more on the higher bass because there's the low bass already underneath of it, layered, playing the same notes. So you don't need the sub twice. This will just build up way too much bass, and way too much bass is probably the biggest problem in most mixes. I'm now a little bit further with the project. I went through all of the individual tracks, EQ'd them. As you can see, almost every single track has now a low cut. I even have on the buses with my reverbs EQs to cut the low end of the reverbs. There's like a small test that you can do, but be careful with it. As always, everything that has to do with music production depends on the music you're making, on the track, on your personal preference. But usually when you mute the kick drum and maybe very low percussions and the bass and the sub bass, you should have nothing that is still playing below like 150, maybe 200 hertz. Really depends on the key of the production, everything else. But that's a nice way to check it. You can also check it with a metering tool that will show you the mid and side signal separately, so that you can also double check that everything below that frequency, like maybe 150, 250, 300, that all of it is in mono. Because having the bass, the low end in stereo is probably, after not having enough low cuts on the track, the second biggest problem. Also, whenever you EQ, make sure that you're not EQing everything the same. If you boost the low end by 5 dB, the mid frequencies by 5, and the top end, at the end you're just making the entire track louder, and that doesn't make any sense. So with the EQing, be precise, just boost the things that you like in an instrument. Usually the boost goes to the top end to give it a little bit more of air. EQing is usually about finding frequencies you don't like and lower them, or about making room for another element that just sits in the same frequency spectrum. A lot of instruments, a lot of parts in a track don't really need a whole lot of EQing, sometimes no EQing at all, except for maybe the low cut. So don't overdo it with the EQing. I hear a lot of tracks sometimes when I get tracks to do the mixing for other people, where they just EQ'd away half of the instrument. That doesn't sound good at all. Or they boosted the bass just because they love the bass. I can understand the bass is like the best in a track, but if you boost the bass on a vocal, it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm not talking about the bottom vocal part that you might consider the bass of the voice. I'm talking about the frequencies below it, where the human voice doesn't even start. So the only things you boost are maybe the mic rumble, maybe the singer-songwriter tapping with the feet, or just some noise that might occur out of the cable or out of your sound card or whatever. So now let me go through the track, try and get it further, and then we will continue with a couple more EQing tips.
Is it you or is it me? I don't know, I just keep letting us go.
Got pretty far on this track today. It's still not finished, of course, but I think just a couple of effect sounds, automation, and then the endless trying to kind of fix the mix even more than on the last track. But so far, happy with it. Now let's get back to a couple of EQing things. There's actually one good example here in this track. This right here is the EQ setting on one of the hi-hat loops. It sounds without the EQing like this. And now with the EQ. A lot thinner, you can especially hear the low cut. Let me go through the low cut so that you can hear where actually it starts to sound clean. Maybe a little bit thin, but in the mix it's alright. Because here between 100 and 500 hertz you have quite a lot of unnecessary low end that just muddies up the mix. especially here around 500. That's a perfect example for why you should use low cuts, or at least double check if a track needs a low cut. Even if you can't hear anything in the very low, still cut it away to maybe 100 Hertz at least, because that's where your speakers might be not perfect. Usually most speakers go down to like 40, maybe 35, maybe 30. If you have speakers that go lower than that, you will probably not even need those tips. Or you just spend way too much money on speakers that you actually don't need. I got another example in this track that clarifies pretty much if you will need a low cut on a kick or not. That's something I wasn't sure really about for quite some time, because some people say yes, low cut the kick, some say don't low cut it. I can only say it really depends. For example, here in this track I didn't cut the kick at all. In the low end there's still everything there. And it sounds good to me. If I apply like a typical kick low cut, maybe at 30 Hertz, it starts to sound a little thinner. It's something really small and very detailed. I can barely hear it when everything else is playing. The track has a tiny bit more, like in the low end, a little bit more pressure that I actually like on this track. Some tracks might need a low cut. It depends on the kick. I mean, probably we all have like thousands of kicks on our computer and every single one is different. So it depends on the kick, on the track, and how you actually want to approach the low end. Because in some cases it makes sense to have the bass actually underneath of the kick and having a higher kick. And a higher kick might need totally different EQ settings. There are also some standard EQ rules that you should know. It totally makes sense to cut away in a narrow band and boost wider. So for example, adding a little bit of air into vocals, you will boost the top end of the track pretty wide, but if you want to get rid of resonating frequencies, it makes sense to have the band very narrow and just reduce them by 10, 15 or maybe even 24 dB. A and B testing is so important when it comes to EQs. You should definitely try it out with the EQ and without the EQ. Also make sure that the volume doesn't change that much, because it might happen that if you boost a couple of frequencies that it sounds better just because it's louder, but try to adjust it by reducing the gain of the EQ so that whenever you bypass an A and B test, whatever EQ settings you applied, that the level stays the same. If you ever need to EQ a whole lot, it might be right for the track, but in most cases I'd say that if you start shaping the sound or doing like a whole lot of fancy EQing or weird stuff, just consider changing the sound. It might be not the right one for the track, or maybe there are too many elements sitting in the same spot in the frequency spectrum. Try to either separate them a little bit. If this doesn't help, the best thing that is even better than any EQ is just not having those elements play at the same time. So just change the arrangement. A lot of things are fixed in the musical part of a song in the arrangement, and EQing is actually already something really fine. The only question left is kind of which EQ to use. I don't really bother that much for most of the low cutting and a little bit of boosting that I do. The Logic EQ is all fine. It also has the stereo mid-side kind of mode where you can do finer things with it. It has a built-in analyzer. It's for free. It comes with Logic. It's the easiest. You just double click onto the EQ window and you can use it. There are a bunch of other EQs available. Some of them might be a little bit better, but it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. If you can't afford those EQ plugins, just go with the standard one. I sometimes use other EQs to do fancy things, and with fancy things I don't mean doing strange EQing things. It's more about giving certain sounds a color, because a lot of those vintage emulated EQs you can buy, they're doing certain things that are hard to describe. They give the sound, yes, a little bit of coloring, maybe saturation, and like this vintage feel we're also used to from tracks back from the 70s, 80s, 90s. Okay, now I actually really need to hurry up. I'm invited over to a barbecue. I said I will be there at around 8. It's past 8 and I didn't even buy any meat, so grocery shopping. It's burger time.